The Prestige corporate lobby had a certain kind of silence on that Tuesday morning, the kind that only settles when something has gone wrong enough that nobody wants to be the first to speak. It was 11:23 a.m., marble floors, recessed lights. The receptionist had stopped typing. The two men near the elevator had gone perfectly still. 6 executives stood in a loose semicircle by the front desk, phones raised, expressions caught somewhere between amusement and something not one of them was ready to name. In the center of all of it, on both knees on the cold marble floor, was a man in a janitor's uniform. His name was Marcus Webb, 47 years old, 19 years in that building. In all that time, he had never given anyone reason to look at him twice. Every single one of them was looking now. In one hand, a white foam container. In the other, a spoon. And seated against the base of the reception desk, barely upright, layered in gray rags, her head covered, her hands trembling, was an elderly woman who appeared as though she had not slept under a roof in weeks. Marcus was feeding her, slowly, carefully, like she was the only person in that entire building. Derek Hollis, director of operations, crossed the lobby in long, deliberate strides. The termination papers already bore his signature. He dropped them to the marble floor beside Marcus's knee without a word. The sound they made was small. The silence that swallowed it was not. Marcus did not stop feeding her. Before this story goes any further, if you believe the world needs more of what Marcus Webb did in that moment, subscribe right now. Because what those executives were about to discover would cost every single one of them something they could not take back. And Marcus Webb was the only person in that lobby who already knew it. 48 hours earlier, 5:47 in the morning, November. The city was still dark when Marcus Webb pulled into the sub-basement lot of Prestige Corporate. He took the service elevator as he always had. In 19 years, he had never once entered through the front doors. That entrance was for other people, and he had understood that without anyone explaining it. Prestige Corporate was 44 floors of glass and steel in the heart of the financial district. 3 Fortune 500 companies held leases above the 20th floor. The lobby renovation alone had cost more than Marcus would earn in the rest of his working life. He knew this because he had overheard it once while cleaning a floor beneath 2 men who never noticed him there. That was the thing about being invisible. Marcus Webb was not a broken man. That distinction mattered. He was a man carrying weight with practiced, deliberate calm. His daughter, Zoe, had lived with type 1 diabetes since she was 9 years old. She was 16 now. The insulin costs consumed the second half of every paycheck before the month was done. His wife had left 2 years ago. Not cruelly, just honestly. She said she needed more than careful. He didn't argue. He kept showing up for Zoe the way he showed up for everything else, quietly, without announcement. Every morning before she left for school, he told her the same thing. It was the only philosophy he owned. If you see someone hungry, you feed them. That's the whole law. He had worked 19 years without a formal complaint, without a missed shift, and without asking for anything beyond what the job required. He had built his invisibility deliberately, because in a building like Prestige Corporate, being noticed rarely ended well for a man like him. He had one rule for himself above all others: never carry anything from his personal life through those service doors. Keep the two worlds separate. He had held that rule without exception. Until that morning. He rounded the corner of the service entrance and stopped. A figure sat against the wall beside the loading dock. Elderly, female, still. A breakfast bag rested untouched at her side, left by someone hours before, already cold. He stood there. His shift started in 2 minutes. Hollis had been running time audits all week. He almost kept walking. Almost. Her name, as far as Marcus could determine, was Ruth. She offered no last name, He didn't ask for one. She was well past 70, her face mapped with the particular lines that come not from age alone, but from years spent outdoors, in cold and wind and exposure. Her hands shook with the low, constant tremor of someone who had gone too long without warmth. But her eyes were different from everything else about her. Sharp, still, alert in a way that didn't match the rags. She watched Marcus the way people watch things they want to memorize. He guided her into the service corridor, out of the November wind. He gave her his own lunch, what he had packed that morning for his own break. He sat across from her on an equipment crate and watched her eat slowly. She said almost nothing, but she tracked his every movement with that same focused, unhurried attention. The way he folded his hands, the way he checked the corridor door, the way he never once looked impatient. Did not know that a security camera mounted above the corridor entrance had captured all of it. By 9 that morning, the footage was already circulating on the executive floor group chat. Screenshots, laughing reactions. Someone typed, "The janitor found himself a charity case." 3 people replied with laughing emojis before the message was even a minute old. Head of Security Calvin Moore delivered the first warning formally and without hostility. Marcus signed the acknowledgement form, said nothing. The second morning he came back. Ruth was at the same corner. He brought food from the vending machine this time, paid out of his own pocket, sat with her again, fed her again. Before he left, she reached out and held his hand briefly, just for a moment, the way someone holds something they are afraid of dropping. Derek Hollis filed a formal written complaint that same afternoon. Zero tolerance policy, unauthorized persons on corporate property. One more incident meant immediate termination. He made that clear, in writing, with a copy sent to HR. The mockery on the executive floor had sharpened into something more organized by day 3. There was a name for Ruth circulating in the emails now, a nickname, casual and contemptuous. It traveled across 3 floors without a single person questioning it. If any of this is making your blood pressure rise, good. Hit subscribe, because where this story goes next will make everything you just heard feel like the opening act. On the 3rd morning, Marcus arrived at the service entrance. Ruth was not there. He checked the alley, the loading dock, nothing. Then his radio crackled. Security at the front desk, flat and unhurried. Marcus Webb, report to the main lobby immediately. Ruth had not waited. She had walked through the front doors of Prestige Corporate, sat down in the center of the marble lobby, and refused to move until he arrived. Marcus arrived in the lobby to find Ruth on the floor near the base of the reception desk. She had not collapsed dramatically. She had simply lowered herself down, the way someone does when their body stops negotiating, and stayed there. The front desk receptionist had called security. Security had called Hollis. Nobody had called an ambulance. Marcus did not stop to ask questions. He had food in his uniform pocket. He had started carrying extra after the 2nd day, the way a man carries an umbrella once he has learned what it means to be caught without one. He knelt down beside her, opened the container, picked up the spoon, and began feeding her with the same slow, careful attention he had given her every time before. The lobby gathered the way lobbies do, not all at once, but in ones and twos, until there were 11 people standing behind Marcus in a loose, widening arc. 2 had their phones raised. 3 were already smiling. Someone near the elevator said something low enough that Marcus couldn't catch the words, but loud enough that the people around him laughed. Derek Hollis arrived at the edge of the group and kept walking until he was at the center of it. He did not lower his voice. That was deliberate. Hollis was a man who understood the value of an audience. He addressed the back of Marcus's head with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. "This is a $40 million building," he said, "not a shelter, not a mission, not your personal cause." He let that sit for a moment, let the room absorb it. A few people near the edges laughed again, the specific laugh of people who want to be seen agreeing with the person holding power. Marcus did not turn around. The spoon went in. Ruth swallowed, slow and steady. Hollis stepped closer. "Webb, I am talking to you." The spoon went in again. 2 security guards moved forward toward Ruth. Marcus's body shifted, just slightly, just enough, positioning itself between them and her, without a word, without a raised hand, without a single motion that anyone could call a threat. He simply made himself into a door they would have to choose to go through. The lobby went completely quiet. Hollis let the termination papers fall from his hand to the marble floor beside Marcus's knee. "Effective immediately," he said. "Get your things." Marcus set the container down, stood slowly, straightened the front of his uniform with both hands, reached into his pocket and produced something small and silver, an old access badge, worn at the edges, the kind issued before the building's renovation. He placed it on the reception desk without explanation, without anger, without a single word directed at Hollis or anyone else in that room. Then he crouched back down to Ruth's eye level. "You'll be okay now," he said quietly. Her hand came up and closed around his wrist, stronger than it should have been. She pulled him close and whispered something, 3 words, low enough that no phone microphone in that lobby caught them. Only Marcus heard. He pulled back slowly, looked at her face for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at the executives, the ones still recording, still smiling, and what was on his face stopped several of them cold. It was not grief. It was not anger. It was not the expression of a man who had just lost something. It was pity, quiet, certain, and absolute. He picked the termination papers up from the floor, folded them once, slid them into his pocket, and walked out through the front doors of Prestige Corporate without looking back at a single person. The silver badge sat on the reception desk. Nobody touched it. Nobody could explain, even to themselves, exactly why. The parking lot was cold and mostly empty at that hour of the morning. Marcus sat in his car for 11 minutes before he started the engine. He knew because he watched the dashboard clock move. He was not crying. He was not angry. He was doing the thing he had always done when something large and terrible landed on him. He was calculating, running through the numbers in his head, the way a man does when the numbers are the only thing standing between his child and a very bad outcome. He called Zoe. She answered on the second ring, still half asleep, and the sound of her voice did something to his face that the entire lobby full of executives had failed to do. He told her calmly, the way he told her everything, as though it were already handled, even when it was not. She cried. He didn't. He told her he would figure it out. He told her he always did. When he hung up, he sat for another moment in the silence of the car, and then he pulled out of the lot and drove toward the city. He did not know what was happening inside Prestige Corporate behind him. Ruth had not left. She was seated in one of the lobby's leather guest chairs, the kind reserved exclusively for scheduled visitors, with the particular posture of a woman who has never been asked to leave anywhere in her life and had no intention of starting now. Security approached. She looked at the guard with an expression of complete calm and said 2 words, "Get me a phone." An old, cracked cell phone was produced from behind the desk. She made a single call, spoke for less than 90 seconds, hung up. 18 minutes later, 3 black SUVs pulled up outside the building. Not the conspicuous kind, the kind that carry people who have nothing left to prove. 2 attorneys stepped out carrying document cases. Behind them, a woman in a charcoal suit walked directly to the reception desk and asked for the CEO. Not for security, not for Hollis, for the CEO, by name, using a private extension number that existed in no public directory. The junior receptionist on duty that morning was the one who finally picked up the silver badge Marcus had left on the desk. She turned it over in her hands. The design was old, pre-renovation. The name on it was not Marcus Webb. It was a corporate registration number and a founder designation, the kind issued in 1987 when the building belonged to an entirely different company. She showed it to the senior receptionist, who showed it to the floor manager, who went very still and very pale in a way that made everyone nearby stop what they were doing. The CEO of Prestige Corporate had spent his morning on the 34th floor, completely unaware that the woman his executive team had been mocking, photographing, and naming in joke emails for 3 consecutive days was the single reason that floor existed at all. If you never want to miss how stories like this one end, subscribe right now. Because what happened inside that boardroom in the next 20 minutes was something none of them saw coming. The boardroom on the 34th floor had never been entered the way Ruth entered it that afternoon. No invitation, no announcement from the front desk. She walked in with one attorney on each side and took the chair at the far end of the table as though she had sat in it before, which, as it turned out, she had. The CEO looked up from his phone. His expression moved through confusion, then recognition, then something that settled in his face like cold water. Her full name, spoken aloud by her lead attorney into that silent room, was Edith Ruth Caldwell, founder, original architect, the woman who had built the company that became Prestige Corporate through 3 acquisitions and 2 rebranding campaigns specifically designed to move her name off the letterhead and out of the lobby. She had sold her primary stake in 1998, but buried inside the original incorporation documents, pages that the current legal team had apparently never read with sufficient care, was a silent 23% equity clause, dormant for decades, never once activated. Until today. She had been inside the building for 6 weeks, deliberately dressed, deliberately silent, moving through the spaces that bore her company's legacy, watching the culture that had grown in the years since her name was removed from the walls. In 6 weeks, across dozens of interactions, one person had stopped. One person had looked down. One person had fed her without asking a single question in return. The phones, the group chat, the forwarded emails, the nickname that had traveled across 3 floors without objection. Legal counsel would be reviewing all of it before the day was done. Ruth made one request before any motion was raised, before any board action was recorded. Her voice was quiet and left no room for negotiation. "Find Marcus Webb," she said, "and bring him back, not as a janitor." They called his number immediately. It rang twice and went to voicemail. They sent a car to the address on file. Zoe answered the door, alone. She told them her father had left for the hospital 40 minutes ago. Marcus was in the waiting room when Ruth walked through the hospital doors, termination papers still folded in his pocket. Zoe was stable. The insulin crash had been caught early enough, but she was admitted for the night, and Marcus had been sitting in that plastic chair for 40 minutes, running numbers in his head that no longer added up the way they needed to. Ruth sat down beside him without preamble. Her attorney took the chair on the other side and opened a document case across his knees. Within 10 minutes, a full ongoing medical coverage arrangement for Zoe had been established. Not a gesture, not a one-time payment. A permanent structure, negotiated in a hospital corridor by a woman who had clearly solved harder problems before most people finished their morning coffee. Then Ruth placed a single card on the chair between them. Head of Building Operations, Prestige Corporate. A title with authority, a salary he had never permitted himself to imagine, and a seat at the table he had spent 19 years cleaning beneath. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "Why me?" he asked. "Really?" she answered without hesitation. "Because you fed me when you had nothing left to lose, and you stayed until I finished eating." As for the executives, mandatory external review or voluntary separation, most chose the review. The footage never became public. Ruth decided it didn't need to. The internal consequence was sufficient. Marcus's new badge arrived the following Monday. Same reception desk where he had left the old one. Different name, different title. The marble floors he had spent 19 years cleaning now reflected a different man walking across them. Same man, different floor. If this story reminded you that how you treat the invisible says everything about who you really are, like it, share it, and drop one word in the comments that describes Marcus Webb. One word. Let's see what this community believes in.